few criminals in history have achieved the fame of Al Capone, the legendary mobster also known as Scarface. In most people's minds, he was the perfect definition of a gangster. The pinstripe suit, the cigar between his teeth, the Tommy gun in his hands. He became the untouchable boss of organized crime, ruling Chicago through fear and an oddly captivating charisma. But that image is only the poster version of Al Capone's story, the one Hollywood sold us. The truth is much more complex, dirtier, and honestly, far more interesting. This is not just the tale of a common criminal. It is the story of how a poor kid from Brooklyn, the son of immigrants, became the #1 public enemy of the United States. It is the story of how he built a multi-million-dollar empire selling what everyone wanted, but what the ultra-conservatives and the government banned. And it is the story of how an empire built with blood and bullets was brought down by the stroke of a pen and a diligent accountant. Today, we will dive deep into the life of Alphonse Gabriel Capone, uncovering the man behind the myth, his origins, his brutal rise, his bloody reign, and his fall. Get ready to discover the true story of the greatest mobster in American history. First, let us bust a myth. Al Capone was not a Sicilian mobster who arrived by ship. He was born in Brooklyn, New York, in 1899. His parents were honest, hard-working Italian immigrants who dreamed of a better life in America. But young Al saw no future in following the rules. His neighborhood was a melting pot of poverty and gangs. The street was his real school. He was smart, but had a short temper. At 14, he punched a teacher in the face and never returned to school. His diploma would be earned on the streets, where courage and strength spoke louder than scholarship. It was there he joined youth gangs, like the famous 5 Points Gang, learning the basics of crime, extortion, how to handle himself in a confrontation, and above all, how to command fear and respect. His first real job was as a bouncer and bartender at a Coney Island bar owned by gangster Frankie Yale. And it was there he got the nickname that would haunt him forever. One day, when Al was just 18, he made the huge mistake of making indecent remarks about the body of gangster Frank Galluccio's sister. Enraged, Galluccio slashed Capone's face with a sharp razor, leaving deep cuts. Capone was hospitalized and needed more than 40 stitches to close the wounds. Incredibly, the ruthless Capone never sought revenge against Galluccio, who later even became one of his bodyguards. But the large scars on Capone's face earned him the nickname Scarface. He hated it. He made up stories that he had gotten the scars in the war because the truth was too humiliating. He had been beaten for not knowing when to keep his mouth shut, a lesson he never forgot. While still young, the most important figure in his life was his mentor, a different kind of gangster, more brain than muscle, Johnny Torrio. Torrio saw potential in Capone. He was not just a brute, he was loyal, ambitious, and quick to learn. When Torrio decided to expand west, to a city that was a gold mine waiting to be exploited, he made an invitation, one that would change the history of organized crime forever. He called Al Capone to Chicago. Think of Chicago in the 1920s. Prohibition had just begun. The government had banned alcohol, but instead of eliminating drinking, it simply made it illegal. And when something everyone wants becomes illegal, whoever supplies it becomes king. Chicago was like the Wild West, but instead of Texas gunslingers in cowboy hats, it had gangsters in suits and ties with Italian accents. And Johnny Torrio, with Capone as his right-hand man, had come to claim the throne. Torrio was the strategist. He organized the Chicago Outfit, a crime syndicate run more like a corporation. They did not just sell alcohol, they controlled brothels, gambling houses, and anything that made money. Capone was the operations manager. He made sure the beer got delivered, rivals stayed in line, and the police looked the other way. They did not fight the system, they bought it. Mayors, police chiefs, judges, everyone was on Torrio's payroll. In 1924, they basically took over the neighboring town of Cicero, intimidating voters with armed goons to elect their own mayor. It was crime in broad daylight. But the throne came at a price. Rival gangs, especially the North Side Gang, would not just let them be. Violence exploded in what became known as the Beer Wars. In 1925, Johnny Torrio was ambushed and nearly killed. Shot and shaken, he decided enough was enough. He retired, returned to Italy, and handed the entire empire to his 26-year-old protégé. Al Capone was now the boss, the undisputed king of Chicago. With Capone in charge, the game changed. He was bolder, more visible, and far more violent than Torrio. His empire was pulling in the equivalent of over $1.5 billion a year in today's money. He lived in luxury hotels, had an army of bodyguards, and his name was in every newspaper. Capone's money machine was a complex and diversified operation, far beyond simple bootlegging. His distilleries and breweries ran non-stop, supplying a vast network of speakeasies, clandestine bars ranging from dingy basements to elegant jazz clubs. Beyond booze, Capone controlled laundry unions, forcing business owners to pay for protection, and dominated illegal gambling with thousands of slot machines and betting parlors across the city. It was all sustained by systemic corruption. He had hundreds of cops, politicians, and judges on his payroll, ensuring he operated with near-total impunity. Despite his brutality, Capone carefully cultivated the image of a modern Robin Hood. To the public, especially Chicago's poor and immigrant communities, he was a benefactor. During the Great Depression, he opened one of the first soup kitchens, serving 3 meals a day to thousands of unemployed people so no one would go hungry under his watch. He handed out turkeys at Thanksgiving and donated money to churches and orphanages. These acts of charity, widely publicized by the press, built him a popular support base and painted him as a man of the people, a hero helping the needy when the government failed. That reputation let him live a life of glamour and excess in plain sight. Capone loved media attention, always impeccably dressed in expensive silk suits, felt hats, and diamond rings. He attended operas, baseball games, and the finest nightclubs, often surrounded by reporters jotting down his every word. He presented himself not as a gangster, but as a businessman, simply meeting public demand. That constant media presence turned him into a national celebrity, a symbol of the jazz age and of defiance against prohibition, fascinating and terrifying America in equal measure. But to keep that power, blood had to flow. His rivalry with the North Side Gang, now led by George Bugs Moran, reached a critical point. Moran was a thorn in Capone's side, stealing shipments and challenging his control. Capone decided it was time to end the competition once and for all. What happened that day shocked America and cemented Al Capone's legend as a monster. The plan was brutally ingenious. Capone's gunmen, disguised as police officers, entered a garage used as Moran's headquarters. Inside were 7 members of the rival gang. They did not resist, after all. They were cops. What harm could they do? Taken by surprise, they were lined up against the wall and executed in cold blood, over 70 bullets. It was a mass execution. The main target, Bugs Moran, escaped by chance. He was late to the meeting and, seeing the police car outside, turned away. Meanwhile, Capone had the perfect alibi. He was in Florida, at his mansion, making sure everyone knew he was far from the massacre. The event became known as the St. Valentine's Day Massacre. It was a turning point for Chicago. Gang violence was no longer hidden in the shadows. It was front-page news. The public, which had once seen Capone as a charming rebel providing a service, now saw the monster behind the mask. The federal government, humiliated, decided enough was enough. The hunt for Al Capone had officially begun. The government launched a 2-pronged attack. The first was the most famous, led by Treasury agent Eliot Ness and his team, nicknamed the Untouchables, because they supposedly could not be bought, a task force dedicated to bringing down Capone. Ness and his men were a thorn in Capone's side, smashing his distilleries, intercepting shipments, and making plenty of noise in the press. They tried to hurt Capone's wallet, but it was like trying to empty the ocean with a bucket. The empire was too big. They could not convict him for any violent crimes. No one would testify against him. Fear was the best insurance money could buy. But there was a second front, less glamorous, but far more effective: the Internal Revenue Service. While Ness was smashing barrels with axes, a quiet team of accountants, led by Agent Frank J. Wilson, was waging a different war, a war of numbers. Their logic was simple. Capone lived like a king, spending millions. Where did the money come from? He had never declared a cent of it on his income tax returns. The challenge was proving the money was his. Wilson and his team spent years combing through records, following the money, looking for any slip-up. And they found one, a ledger from one of Capone's businesses that recorded payments to Al. It was proof he was receiving a large income and evading taxes. It was the tip of the iceberg that would sink Capone's Titanic. In 1931, Al Capone went to trial, not for murder, not for bootlegging, but for tax evasion. He was so confident he even laughed in court. He tried to bribe the jury, but the judge swapped it out at the last minute. The result? Guilty. Capone was sentenced to 11 years in federal prison. The most powerful gangster in America, who had built an empire with violence, was brought down for not paying his taxes. The irony was crushing. If Capone thought prison would be easy, he was wrong. He was sent to Alcatraz, the most secure and brutal prison in the country. In Alcatraz, he was prisoner number 85. All his money, influence, and power meant nothing. Other inmates despised him. He was even stabbed in the shower. His status as king of crime was gone. But Capone's greatest enemy was not another inmate. It was a disease he had carried for years: syphilis. In prison, without proper treatment, it advanced to his brain, causing neurosyphilis. The man who had terrorized Chicago began to lose himself in his own mind. His behavior became erratic and childlike. Medical reports said he had the mental capacity of a 12-year-old. He was released in 1939, no longer considered a threat to society, a pale shadow of his former self. He spent his last years in seclusion at his Florida mansion, cared for by his wife, May. He went fishing, talked to trees, and according to accounts, had long conversations with men who had been dead for years. The great Al Capone, Scarface, was now a broken man, haunted by his own demons. On January 25, 1947, at age 48, Al Capone died, not in a blaze of gunfire, but of a heart attack following a stroke. The King of Chicago died in his bed, a quiet, pitiful end to a life of turbulence, fury, and glamour. So why, decades later, are we still fascinated by Al Capone? Because his story is more than just one of brutal crimes. It is a dark distortion of the American dream. He came from nothing and built an empire, defying the law and the government itself. He became the archetype of the modern gangster, a figure pop culture recycles endlessly. He was a monster, a cold-blooded killer responsible for hundreds of deaths. But he was also a marketing genius, a man who understood public image and sold himself as a benefactor while poisoning the city with violence. The story of Al Capone reveals an uncomfortable truth. The line between hero and villain, between order and chaos, is thinner than we like to admit. He was a product of his time, a symptom of a society full of contradictions, and his legacy serves as an eternal warning. No empire, no matter how powerful, is too big or too solid to fall. In the end, one way or another, the system always wins.